The Galactic Academy of Interspecies Relations floated in the darkness of space like a jewel made of glass and silver. And it was here that the brightest students from 100 different worlds came to learn how to live together in peace. Danny Cole sat in the back row of his classroom and tried to make himself smaller, which was difficult because he was 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and thick arms built from years of military training. He was 23 years old and the only human at the entire academy. The other students always kept their distance from him, not because they were mean, but because they were afraid, and Danny understood why. Humans came from Earth, and Earth was what the galaxy called a death world. A death world was a planet so dangerous that most species could not survive there for even a single day, and Earth was rated as a Class 12 planet, which meant it was one of the most deadly places in the known universe. The gravity was strong enough to crush the bones of weaker species, and the radiation from the sun could burn through unprotected skin. And massive predators roamed every continent, looking for prey. The fact that humans had not only survived on such a world, but had actually thrived there and built cities and technology made them both fascinating and terrifying to the rest of the galaxy. Danny had spent 4 years in the United Earth Marine Corps before he received a scholarship to attend the academy. And during those 4 years, he had seen things that would give most aliens nightmares for the rest of their lives. But he did not like to talk about that. Professor Kelvik stood at the front of the classroom and cleared his throat, which sounded like rocks grinding together, because he was a Sarathi with blue velvet skin and 6 eyes that blinked in different patterns. Today we welcome a new transfer student to our class, the professor announced, and Danny noticed that his voice was trembling slightly. Please show appropriate courtesy to our guest. The door at the front of the room slid open with a soft hiss, and Danny felt the temperature drop by several degrees. She walked into the classroom like a shadow come to life, moving with a grace that seemed almost liquid, as if her bones were made of water instead of calcium. She was nearly 7 feet tall, with skin as black as the void between stars, and her eyes glowed a soft amber color that reminded Danny of the warning lights on a nuclear reactor. She was a Vexari, and every student in the room knew exactly what that meant. The Vexari were the most feared assassins in the entire galaxy, trained from birth to be perfect killing machines with reflexes 3 times faster than most other species. Their claws could cut through the hull of a starship, and they could turn invisible whenever they wanted by bending light around their bodies. About them during his time in the Marines, and he had hoped he would never meet one in person. This is Nix Vorath, Professor Kelvik said, and his 6 eyes were all looking at the floor instead of at her. She will be joining us for the remainder of the semester. Whispers exploded throughout the classroom like small fires spreading through dry grass. What is she doing here? One student hissed to another. Is this some kind of test? Someone else asked. I heard her family has killed more beings than the Great Plague of Krelia, a third voice added. Nix stood at the front of the room and let her amber eyes sweep across the students like searchlights, looking for something specific. And one by one, every student she looked at flinched or looked away or tried to hide behind the person sitting next to them. Then her eyes found Danny. She stopped moving completely and stared at him with an intensity that would have made most people want to run away screaming. Danny had seen that look before. He had seen it in the eyes of the Martian sand tigers that had attacked his squad during a training mission, and he had seen it in the depths of the Venusian cloud serpents that could swallow a shuttle whole, and he had seen it in the faces of enemy soldiers who thought they had the advantage. It was the look of a predator sizing up potential prey. Danny smiled. Not a nervous smile, or a polite smile, or even a friendly smile, but a small, confident smirk that said he was not impressed and not afraid and not going to look away first. Something changed in the Vexari's expression, something subtle that most people would have missed entirely. It was surprise. For a single moment, Nyx Voreth looked genuinely confused, as if Danny had done something she had not expected and could not explain. "Miss Voreth," Professor Kelvix said quickly, clearly eager to move the class along, "please take any available seat." There were plenty of empty seats in the classroom, because nobody wanted to sit anywhere near the human Deathworlder. And there was an entire row of empty chairs on either side of Danny. Nyx walked directly toward him. Students scrambled out of her way, like small fish fleeing from a shark, pressing themselves against walls and climbing over desks to avoid being in her path. She stopped at the empty seat right next to Danny and lowered herself into it with a grace that made the simple act of sitting look like a dance. "You did not flinch," she said quietly, her voice as smooth as silk, but with something sharp hidden underneath. "Was I supposed to?" Danny shrugged his broad shoulders. Her amber eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned a little closer to him, close enough that he could smell something cold and metallic on her breath. "Everyone flinches when they see a Vexari for the first time," she said. "It is a survival instinct. That is programmed into the DNA of most species throughout the galaxy." "I guess my DNA did not get that message," Danny replied. Professor Kelvix began his lecture about the history of interspecies trade agreements, but neither Danny nor Nyx paid any attention to him. They were too busy studying each other. "You are the human," Nyx said, not asking, but stating a fact. "And you are the assassin. My people prefer the term precision elimination specialists." "I bet they do." Nyx tilted her head to one side like a bird examining something interesting. "I have read about your species in the Guild archives, and the files say that humans are fragile creatures with soft skin and weak bones, who only survived on their death world through luck and stubbornness." Danny laughed softly. "And what do you think?" "I think," Nyx said slowly, "that the Guild archives might be incomplete." The class continued around them, and other students gave answers to questions, and Professor Kelvix drew diagrams on the holographic board at the front of the room. But in the back row, two predators from two different worlds sat side by side, and took the first steps towards something that neither of them could have predicted. When the class finally ended, and students began filing out of the room, Nyx stood and looked down at Danny with those glowing amber eyes. "I will be watching you, human." Danny stood as well, and found that he was only a few inches shorter than her, which seemed to surprise her again. "Good," he said. "Then you might learn something." And with that he walked out of the classroom, and left the most dangerous assassin in the galaxy standing alone, and wondering what exactly she had gotten herself into. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Danny Cole had experienced since his time in the Marine Corps. Nyx Voreth had decided to make him her personal project, and she approached this task with the same dedication that her people brought to assassination contracts. She wanted to see him afraid, and she was willing to work very hard to make that happen. It started with small things. Danny would be walking through the corridors of the academy on his way to class, when suddenly Nyx would appear right beside him, materializing from thin air as her camouflage abilities faded and revealed her standing close enough to touch him. The first time it happened, a nearby Talaxian student screamed so loudly that security was called, but Danny just glanced at Nyx and said good morning and kept walking. The second time it happened during lunch in the crowded cafeteria, and 3 students fainted when Nyx suddenly became visible right behind Danny while he was standing in line, eating his meal. Danny offered her a bite of his sandwich. The third time she appeared in his dormitory room at 3 in the morning, standing at the foot of his bed with her amber eyes glowing in the darkness. like twin flames. Danny yawned and asked if she wanted to watch a movie, since he was having trouble sleeping anyway. None of it worked. No matter what Nyx did, no matter how suddenly she appeared, or how close she got, or how threatening she tried to be, Danny never showed the slightest sign of fear. His heart rate stayed steady, and his breathing stayed calm, and his eyes never widened with the terror that she had seen in every other species she had ever encountered. It was driving her absolutely crazy. "Why do you not fear me?" she demanded one afternoon, as they sat together in the Academy library, having appeared beside him without warning, for what must have been the 20th time. Danny set down the datapad he had been reading, and looked at her with an expression of mild curiosity. "Should I fear you?" "Yes," Nyx said with obvious frustration. "I am a Vexari assassin from one of the most prestigious elimination guilds in the galaxy, and I have been trained since birth to kill beings far stronger and faster than you, and I could end your life before your heart beats one more time." "Maybe," Danny agreed calmly, "but you would not survive trying." Nyx leaned forward and extended her claws, letting them catch the light so that Danny could see how sharp they were. "You are arrogant for a creature so fragile." "Fragile?" Danny repeated the word like it was a joke. "Is that what you think humans are? Your skin tears easily, and your bones break under pressure, and you require constant food and water and sleep to function, and you cannot even survive in a vacuum without special equipment." Danny was quiet for a moment, and then he leaned forward as well, until his face was only inches from hers. "Hers. Let me tell you about Fragile," he said, and his voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now. Something old and patient, and very, very dangerous. "My species evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill us. And I mean everything. From the bacteria in the water, to the predators that hunted in packs, to the weather that could freeze us solid or burn us alive depending on the season." Nyx did not move, but her amber eyes were locked on his. "We did not have claws or fangs or camouflage abilities or any of the natural weapons that other species developed. So instead, we became the most creative killers in our entire ecosystem." Danny held up his hand and showed her his blunt fingernails and soft skin. "We invented tools and weapons and traps, and we learned to hunt in groups and communicate silently and track prey across hundreds of miles without rest. And we developed something called persistence hunting, where we would simply follow an animal until its heart gave out from exhaustion, because humans can run longer and farther than almost any other creature on our planet." He leaned even closer. "Our bones heal stronger after they break, which means we can survive injuries that would permanently cripple other species. And our immune systems learn from every disease they encounter, so that we become more resistant over time. And we have a chemical in our bodies called adrenaline that makes us faster and stronger and more dangerous when we are threatened." Nyx was very still now. "My species survived ice ages and plagues and asteroid impacts and volcanic eruptions and every other disaster that our planet threw at us. And do you know what the most dangerous thing on Earth turned out to be?" "What?" Nyx asked quietly. "Us," Danny said. "We killed each other more efficiently than anything else ever could, and we spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare before we ever reached the stars, so please do not call me fragile." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nyx slowly retracted her claws and sat back in her chair. "Your species frightens my people," she admitted. "The guild elders speak of humans in whispers, and they have forbidden any contracts against Earth or its colonies." Danny raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "They say that humans hold grudges, and that if you kill one of them, the rest will hunt you across the galaxy for generations, until every member of your family line has been eliminated." "That does sound like us," Danny agreed. Nyx was quiet for another moment, and then she did something that Danny had never seen a Vexari do before. She laughed. It was a strange sound, like glass breaking in slow motion, but there was genuine amusement in it. I think I understand now why you do not fear me, she said. Why is that? Because you are just as much of a monster as I am, only your species has learned to hide it better. Danny smiled, and it was not a nice smile. We prefer the term apex predator. From that day forward, Nyx stopped trying to scare Danny and started trying to understand him instead. She asked him questions about Earth and human history and the wars that had shaped his species, and Danny answered honestly, even when the answers were dark and terrible and painted humanity in colors that most species would find disturbing. He told her about the world wars and the nuclear weapons and the genocides and the countless other atrocities that humans had committed against each other. And Nyx listened and nodded and began to realize that she and the human Deathworlder were not so different after all. They were both predators who had been shaped by violence and trained to survive at any cost. The only question was what they would choose to do with that shared nature. Would they remain weapons in the hands of others, or would they choose a different path and fight back against the violence that had shaped them? They find a new path that neither of their peoples had considered before. Danny did not know the answer to that question yet, but he was starting to think that Nyx might be worth getting to know better. And that was a feeling he had not expected when he first saw an assassin walk into his classroom and try to make him flinch. The friendship between Danny Cole and Nyx Voreth grew slowly like a plant pushing through concrete, unexpected and stubborn and somehow beautiful in its strangeness. They began eating meals together in the cafeteria, which caused quite a stir among the other students who could not understand why the most dangerous assassin in the galaxy and the only human Deathworlder at the Academy would choose to spend time with each other. They studied together in the library and walked together between classes, and sometimes they would sit on one of the observation decks late at night and watch the ships drift past while talking about their lives. Danny learned that Nyx had not chosen to become an assassin any more than he had chosen to be born on a death world. The Vexari were organized into family guilds that determined the path of every child before they took their first breath, and Nyx had been marked for the assassin caste from the moment she entered the world. Had been trained to kill before she learned to read, and she had completed her first contract when she was only 12 years old by their calendar, and she had spent every day since then adding names to a list that she was not allowed to speak about. I never wanted this, she admitted one evening as the stars wheeled slowly past the observation window. I wanted to be an artist when I was very young, before the guild took that desire away from me. Danny watched her face in the dim light and saw something that he had never expected to see in the eyes of a Vexari assassin. Sadness. Why are you here at the Academy? He asked gently. This does not seem like the kind of place an assassin guild would send their people. Nyx was quiet for a long moment. I hesitated on a contract, she finally said. The target was a family that had offended one of the noble houses, and the contract specified that there were to be no survivors. Her amber eyes dimmed, slightly. There were children in that family, Danny. Small ones who had done nothing wrong, except be born to the wrong parents. And when I looked at them, I could not make myself complete the contract. What happened? I let them escape and told the guild that they had already fled before I arrived. But my handlers knew I was lying, and they sent me here as punishment. She turned to look at him with an expression that was somewhere between shame and defiance. They want me to remember what happens to Vexari who show mercy, and they want me to spend time among the other species so that I will remember why we consider them prey instead of equals. Danny reached out and put his hand on her arm, a gesture that would have gotten anyone else killed instantly. You did the right thing, he said simply. My people would not agree. Then your people are wrong. Nyx looked at his hand on her arm, and then looked at his face, and something shifted in her expression that Danny could not quite identify. Before either of them could say anything else, the alarms started screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the station, and an automated voice announced that there was a security breach in Sector 7. And Danny was on his feet before the first syllable finished echoing through the corridor. "Stay here," he said, as his training took over and his body prepared for combat. Nyx stood beside him with her claws already extended. "I am an assassin, human, and I do not hide while others fight." They moved through the corridors together, following the sound of screaming and weapons fire. And when they reached the main atrium, they found a scene of chaos and terror. A group of armed figures in black armor had taken control of the large open space at the heart of the academy, and they were holding dozens of students hostage at gunpoint. Danny counted at least 20 attackers with plasma rifles and energy shields, and he recognized the crimson symbol on their armor immediately. The Crimson Consortium. They were a terrorist organization that believed the galaxy should remain divided by species, and they hated any attempt at interspecies cooperation or integration. The Academy was exactly the kind of target they loved to attack. The leader of the group stood at the center of the atrium, a massive Krellian with scarred gray skin and cybernetic arms that ended in weapon attachments instead of hands. "We know there is a human here," the Krellian bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Give us the Deathworlder, and the rest of you might survive this day." Danny felt Nyx grab his arm as he started to step forward. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "They want me, so I am going to give them what they want." "They will kill you." Danny looked at her, and she saw something change in his eyes, something that made the amber glow of her own eyes seem dim by comparison. "They will try," he said. He pulled his arm free from her grip and walked out into the open atrium with his hands raised where everyone could see them. The Consortium soldiers immediately trained their weapons on him, 20 plasma rifles pointing at his chest from every direction. The hostages whimpered and cried, and Professor Kelvik stared at Danny with all 6 of his eyes wide with horror. "I am the human you wanted," Danny called out, his voice calm and steady. "Let the students go, and you can have me." The Krellian leader laughed, a harsh sound like metal scraping against stone. "You think we are stupid, Deathworlder? Because we know what your kind is capable of, and we are not going to give you any chance to fight back." He raised one of his weapon arms and pointed it directly at Danny's head. "We are going to make an example of you today, human, and we are going to show the entire galaxy that Deathworlders can bleed and die just like everyone else." Danny smiled, and there was nothing friendly or warm or even remotely human in that expression. "You are absolutely right," he said. "Humans can bleed, and humans can die." The Krellian's finger tightened on his trigger. "But we do not do either one easily." The lights went out. For exactly 3 seconds, the atrium was plunged into complete darkness, and in those 3 seconds, the sounds that echoed through the space would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. There was the crack of bones breaking, and the scream of soldiers who suddenly found themselves unable to see their enemy, and there was the hiss of claws cutting through armor, and the thud of bodies hitting the floor. When the emergency lights flickered on, the scene had completely transformed. 12 consortium soldiers lay unconscious on the ground, with their weapons scattered around them, like fallen. Danny stood over the Krellian leader, with his foot on the terrorist's chest, and the Krellian's own weapon arm twisted at an angle that should not have been possible. Blood ran from a cut on Danny's forehead, but he was breathing slowly and steadily, as if he had just finished a light workout, instead of taking down a dozen armed attackers in total darkness. And beside him stood Nyx, her camouflage fading as she became visible again, her claws dripping with something that glinted in the emergency lights. 3 more soldiers lay behind her, alive but completely incapacitated. "How?" the Krellian gasped from beneath Danny's foot. You moved so fast that we could not even track you. Danny looked down at him with those ancient predator eyes. Adrenaline, he said simply. It is a wonderful little chemical that my body produces when someone threatens me, and it makes everything else seem very, very slow. He pressed down harder with his foot. And I was not alone. Nyx stepped forward and let the Krellian see her clearly, and the terrorist's face went pale gray with terror. You planned this, he whispered. We improvised, Danny corrected him. That is another thing humans are very good at. Security forces arrived moments later and began securing the remaining consortium members, and the hostages were freed and the wounded were taken to the medical bay. Danny and Nyx stood together in the middle of the chaos and looked at each other. You fight well for a fragile species, Nyx said. Danny grinned, despite the blood still running down his face. You are not so bad yourself for a professional killer. And for the first time since she arrived at the academy, Nyx smiled back at him with genuine warmth. The medical bay of the Galactic Academy was filled with the soft hum of healing machines and the quiet beeping of monitors as Danny Cole sat on an examination table and let a nurse press a dermal regenerator against the cut on his forehead. The wound was already closing, the edges of torn skin knitting back together with a speed that made the Talaxian nurse's golden eyes widen in surprise. Your cellular regeneration rate is remarkable, she said as she watched the healing process. Most species would require several treatments to repair damage like this, but your body is doing most of the work on its own. Danny shrugged. Humans evolved to survive injuries that would kill other creatures, and our bodies learned to fix themselves quickly so we could keep fighting or running or hunting. Nyx stood in the corner of the medical bay with her arms crossed and her amber eyes fixed on Danny, as if she was afraid he might disappear if she looked away. Left his side, since the security forces had arrived to clean up the mess in the atrium, and she had refused to let anyone treat the small cuts on her own arms until she was certain that Danny was receiving proper care. The events of the past hour were still playing through her mind like a recording on repeat. She had seen Danny walk into that atrium surrounded by armed terrorists, and she had watched him face down 20 plasma rifles with nothing but a smile on his face. And when the lights went out, she had seen something that she would never forget. Danny had moved through the darkness like a ghost made of violets, striking with a precision and ferocity that reminded her of the most elite members of her own guild. He had taken down 12 soldiers in less than 3 seconds, while she had handled only 3, and he had done it without any weapons, and without any armor, and without any of the genetic enhancements that made her people such effective killers. He had done it with nothing but his human body and his human reflexes and his human determination to protect the innocent beings who were counting on him. It was the most impressive thing she had ever witnessed. The door to the medical bay slid open, and a parade of important-looking individuals began filing into the room. Danny recognized the Academy Chancellor immediately, a small Talaxian woman with golden skin and an expression that suggested she had been having a very difficult day. Behind her came representatives from at least a dozen different species, ambassadors and officials and military officers who all stared at Danny with expressions that ranged from awe to fear to something that looked uncomfortably like hunger. Mr. Cole, the Chancellor said as she approached his examination table, what you did today was extraordinary, and on behalf of the entire Academy, I want to express our deepest gratitude. Danny nodded. Chancellor, you saved the lives of 47 students and 6 faculty members, and you prevented what could have been the worst terrorist attack in the history of interspecies relations. I had help, Danny said, and he nodded toward Nyx. I could not have done it without her. The Chancellor's expression flickered with something complicated as she glanced at the Vexari assassin. Yes, well, Miss Vorath's assistance has been noted in our reports, and we will need to discuss her future at the Academy in light of today's events. Danny's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean by that? One of the officials behind the Chancellor, a tall Krellian in formal robes, stepped forward with a disapproving expression on his gray face. Surely you understand our concerns, Mr. Cole, as Miss Vorath is a member of an assassin guild that has been responsible for thousands of deaths across the galaxy, and allowing her to remain at an institution dedicated to the protection of life, to peace and cooperation, sends a troubling message. She saved lives today, Danny said flatly. That does not change what she is, another official added, a Sarathi with nervous eyes. The Vixari are killers by nature and by training, and we cannot simply ignore that because of one isolated incident. Danny stood up from the examination table despite the nurse's protests, and the sudden movement made several of the officials take a step backward. Let me make something very clear, he said, and his voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Nix Voreth stays at this academy, or I leave. A murmur rippled through the gathered officials, like a wave spreading across water. The Chancellor's golden eyes widened. Mr. Cole, you cannot be serious, as the Earth Diplomatic Corps specifically requested that you complete your education here, and your departure would create significant political complications. Then it sounds like you have a simple choice to make, Danny replied. The Krellian official stepped forward with anger in his eyes. This is outrageous, and you cannot threaten us with your departure just to protect an assassin. I am not threatening anyone, Danny said. I am stating a fact, and the fact is that Nix Voreth is my friend, and I do not abandon my friends. The word hit Nix like a physical blow. Friend. Her people did not have a word for that concept. Not really, because the Vexari understood allies and enemies and targets, but they did not understand the kind of bond that Danny was describing. She had never had a friend before. She had never had someone who would stand up for her against powerful officials and risk their own future just to make sure she was treated fairly. The Chancellor was quiet for a long moment, and Danny could see her calculating the political implications of what he was saying. Humans were rare in the galactic community. Deathworlders were even rarer, and the Academy had worked very hard to get Danny enrolled, because having a human student sent a powerful message about their commitment to true interspecies integration. If Danny left, the consequences would be significant. Perhaps, the Chancellor finally said, we are being hasty in our judgment. The Krellian official sputtered, Chancellor, you cannot seriously be considering this. I am considering all the factors, the Chancellor replied firmly. And one of those factors is that Miss Voreth did in fact help save dozens of lives today while risking her own. She turned to look at Nix directly. Miss Voreth, can you explain why you chose to help Mr. Cole instead of simply allowing the consortium to achieve their objectives? Nix was quiet for a moment, and then she stepped forward so that she was standing beside Danny. I helped because it was the right thing to do, she said simply. Another official asked, will they not punish you for acting outside your assigned mission? Probably, Nix admitted, but I stopped caring about what my guild thinks a long time ago. Danny looked at her with surprise. You never told me that. You never asked. The Chancellor studied both of them for a long moment, and something in her expression softened slightly. Every species in this room has a violent past, Danny said, breaking the silence, and every world has known war and bloodshed and terrible acts committed in the name of survival or power or simple fear. He looked around at the gathered officials. The Krellians conquered 3 star systems before they joined the Galactic Council, and the Sarathi experimented on prisoners during their expansion wars, and the Talaxians built weapons that could destroy entire planets before they decided that diplomacy was a better path. Several of the officials shifted uncomfortably. Species spent thousands of years killing each other in ways that would make most of you sick to even think about. And we still carry that violence inside us, like a fire that never quite goes out. He put his hand on Nix's shoulder. The Vexari are no different than any of us, and Nix is no different than me, because we are both predators who were shaped by violence and trained to survive at any cost. His voice softened slightly. But this woman chose mercy when she could have chosen death. And she chose to help when she could have hidden. And she chose to stand beside me against impossible odds without asking for anything in return. He looked directly at the Chancellor. That is not the action of a monster, and that is the action of someone who is trying to be better and what she was born to be. The room was silent. Finally, the Chancellor sighed. Very well, and Miss Voreth will remain enrolled at the Academy, pending a regular review of her conduct and behavior. She fixed Danny with a long look. You humans are quite persuasive when you want to be. Danny smiled. We have had a lot of practice, and it used to be how we avoided eating each other. The officials filed out of the medical bay one by one, some looking relieved and others looking frustrated, until only Danny and Nix were left with the confused nurse who had given up on trying to complete her treatment. Nix turned to Danny with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Why did you do that? She asked quietly. Do what? Defend me like that, and risk your place at the Academy, and call me your friend in front of all those important people. Danny looked at her with those calm human eyes. Because you deserve it. You barely know me. I know enough, Danny said, and I know that you hesitated when your guild told you to kill children. And I know that you helped me save those students, without being asked. And I know that you have been searching for something your whole life and never found it. What is that? A chance to be more than what you were born to be. Nix felt something warm and unfamiliar spreading through her chest, and it took her several seconds to realize that it was hope. 3 months had passed since the terrorist attack on the Galactic Academy, and the changes that had taken place in that time would have seemed impossible to anyone who had known the Academy before. Danny Cole and Nix Voreth had become something of celebrities throughout the station, and their unlikely friendship had become the subject of countless discussions and debates among students and faculty alike. Some called it a miracle of interspecies cooperation, while others called it a disaster waiting to happen. But everyone agreed that watching a human Deathworlder and a Vexari assassin walk through the corridors together was one of the strangest sights in the entire galaxy. Danny did not mind the attention, but Nix found it deeply uncomfortable. They stare at us everywhere we go, she complained one afternoon, as they sat together in their usual spot on the observation deck, and I can feel their eyes on my back, like insects crawling across my skin. Laughed. Welcome to what it feels like to be the only human at an alien academy. How do you stand it? You get used to it eventually, and besides, it helps to have someone watching your back. Nix turned to look at him with those glowing amber eyes. Is that what we are doing for each other now, watching each other's backs? Among other things, Danny said with a smile. The relationship between them had evolved over the past 3 months into something that neither of them had expected and neither of them could quite explain. They trained together in the Academy's combat simulation rooms, and Nix had to admit that Danny was one of the most challenging opponents she had ever faced. His human body was slower than hers and weaker than hers in pure strength, but he had a creativity and adaptability that constantly caught her off guard. He would use his environment in ways she never anticipated, turning furniture into weapons and using shadows and angles to hide his movements and setting up elaborate traps that exploited her expectations about how a fight should go. Your species thinks in ways that mine does not, she had told him, after one particularly frustrating training session, where he had managed to pin her using nothing but a piece of cloth and a careful understanding of leverage. Humans had to be clever to survive, Danny had replied, because we were never the fastest or the strongest predators on our world, so we learned to be the smartest instead. They also spent long hours talking about their pasts and their futures and all the complicated things in between. Danny told her about his family back on Earth, about his mother who had raised 4 children by herself after his father died in a mining accident, and about his brothers and sisters who were scattered across 3 different colonies, now chasing their own dreams. Nix told him about the guild and the terrible things she had done in their name, and she did not hide or make excuses, because she had learned that Danny could handle the truth no matter how dark it was. "I have killed 217 beings," she said one night, when the stars seemed particularly cold and distant. "And I remember every single one of their faces." "Does that bother you?" Danny asked. "It used to not bother me at all, and that is what bothers me now." Danny was quiet for a moment. "I killed people too during my time in the Marines, and some of them probably did not deserve it, but I did what I was ordered to do because I believed I was protecting my people." He looked at her with an understanding that she had never found anywhere else. "We both have blood on our hands, Nix, but what matters now is what we choose to do with the rest of our lives." Those words had stayed with her like a song that she could not get out of her head. For as long as she could remember, she had been a weapon in someone else's hand. First the guild, and then the noble houses that paid for her services, and then the academy that had taken her in as a kind of punishment. She had never stopped to think about what she might want for herself. But spending time with Danny had awakened something inside her that she had thought was dead forever. A curiosity about the universe, and a desire to see what lay beyond the narrow path that her people had laid out for her. "I want to leave the guild," she told Danny one evening when they were studying together in the library. "And I want to find out who I could have been if I had been born to a different family." Danny looked up from his datapad. "That will not be easy, because from what you have told me, the Vexari guilds do not let their members just walk away." "They do not," Nix agreed, "and anyone who tries to leave is usually hunted down and killed as an example to others. Then we will need a plan." The word "we" hit Nix harder than she expected. "You would help me leave the guild even though it would put you in danger." Danny smiled. "I thought we already established that I do not abandon my friends." Over the following weeks they developed a strategy together, using Danny's tactical mind and Nix's knowledge of guild operations to create a path that might actually work. It would require perfect timing and a lot of luck, and probably some violence at certain key moments, but it was possible. "You know," Danny said one night as they were going over the final details of their plan, "when you first walked into my classroom, I thought you were going to kill me." Nix laughed, that strange glass-breaking sound that Danny had come to find oddly beautiful. "I thought about it," she admitted, "because you refused to flinch, and that made me want to prove that you were as weak as everyone else." "Changed your mind." Nix was quiet for a moment. "You looked at me like I was a person instead of a monster, and no one had ever done that before, not even my own family." She reached out and took his hand, her claws carefully retracted so that she would not hurt him. "You taught me that I do not have to be what my people made me, and that I can choose a different path if I am brave enough to walk it." Danny squeezed her hand gently. "And you taught me that even the most dangerous predators in the galaxy are capable of change when someone gives them a chance." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and thinking about the future. The plan they had created would go into effect in 3 days, and if it worked, Nix would be free from her guild forever. If it failed, they would both probably die, but somehow that possibility did not seem as frightening as it should have. "I have a question," Nix said. "Eventually." "What is it?" "In your language you have a word for what we are to each other, and you called me your friend when you defended me to the officials." "Yes, but is that all we are?" she asked, and her amber eyes were searching his face for something she did not know how to name. "Friends." Danny looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw warmth and affection and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "Among humans we have many words for the different kinds of connections people can have with each other," he said slowly, "and friendship is one of them, but there are other words for bonds that go even deeper." "What are they?" Danny smiled. "Why do not I teach you all of them, and then you can decide which one fits us best?" Nix felt that unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest again, the feeling that she had learned to recognize as hope. "I would like that," she said. And so the human Deathworlder and the Vexari assassins sat together on the observation deck of a space station, far from either of their homeworlds, holding hands and watching the stars. They did not know what the future would bring, or whether their plan would succeed, or what challenges they would face in the days and years ahead. But they did know one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Because somewhere in the vast darkness of the galaxy, two predators had found something more valuable than fear or violence or the cold satisfaction of survival. They had found each other. And that was just the beginning of their story.